although I have access to a bunch of information, there's essentially like a value filter that is only going to pull out the information that I feel is relevant and useful for the objective that I have, which is to pass the algebra test. So in order to know if we have enough information to make the pasta, we have to grab information about ourselves, make a value judgment on it, and then perform some action based upon that. Assuming you have been as honest with yourself as is possible in the moment in time, and you have valued the things that you know in the best possible way that you could have, and you are performing the actions that you desire to perform based upon the honesty that you have in the best way that you can, this is by definition the best outcome you could have gotten from your perspective. So now we're moving from a generalized idea of what information or content is in the universe, and now we're talking specifically about the brain and analyzing the brain as a system of information through this kind of information three-part breakdown. So in addition to viewing the brain this way, we're not going to look at it from the perspective of like computational neuroscience, in that, you know, we look at the brain and we break it down as like a machine that's like operating on information, and then we're going to make statements about like why or how people do things from like an almost like deterministic reality, where like things are happening not because there's an experience of choice allowing people to have things happen, but simply because they're like the brain is stretched out through time in that particular way, as defined by the laws of reality or the function of reality. But instead, we're going to look at it from like kind of the first person perspective that you have about reality. And we're going to look at like what you have access to as an experience of being a self, and how you can, or not how you can, but how you make decisions, how you operate, and how you can maximize and benefit most from things that you value. Information in this context is analogous to honesty. Function in this example, or in this context, is analogous to value. And action is analogous in this example to strength. Putting it in the context of honesty, value, and strength makes it a lot more intuitive than putting it in the context of information, function, and action. But when we are describing the constituent parts as we use them with honesty, value, and strength, just remember that what I'm really talking about is an analysis of systems from this previous understanding that we've derived that comes from simply breaking down the content of reality into, information. Information is a category of some possibility of structure of information, that then from that arises function, that from the function placed in a certain environment will cause some kind of action. The kind of layman understanding of what's going on in your head makes it a lot easier to understand when we put it in the terms of like honesty, value, and strength. As our three-dimensional object of the brain is progressing through time, we are having experiences that are the different configurations or permutations of the brain, right? And so at any particular point in time that we are taking kind of a range of human experience out of, and we're examining, or that is to say, in your individual experience, like say, for example, right now, you have some information about the world that you can know. So there's a bunch of information that you have access to. Honesty and rationality, let's just say, is the information that you can access at this particular moment in time in your head. If we have some goal, let's say it's to pass an algebra test, right? If we're currently in the algebra test, in order to have a high amount of honesty, that would mean that we have a high amount of information about algebra inside of our head, right? And I know that that's not really how we use the word honesty, but I think as you see the structure of what I'm saying kind of play itself out, you'll understand why it's honesty / rationality. So it's like, it's the truth about reality as we perceive it that is accessible within our brain at this particular moment in time in the context that we're talking about. And then there is the value that we place on each individual. And remember, I don't really believe in an individuated sense of like information. So I don't think there's like individual pieces of information, but from the human context, when we think about like a discrete or a category of information that we're accessing in our brain, there's a certain amount of value that we have about the information that we receive, right? So let's say in the example of trying to pass an algebra test, I have a bunch of information I have access to, but I'm only going to value the information that I perceive is valuable in regards to the algebra test. And so, although I have access to a bunch of information, there's essentially like a value filter that is only going to pull out the information that I feel is relevant and useful for the objective that I have, which is to pass the algebra test. Basically, we access some information in our brain, we make some kind of value judgment on the information in our brain, and then we, with the value that we have placed upon the information that we have, we're going to make some kind of action. We can think of it kind of in a broad sense of like a set of actions across some period of time, or a very small, short human scale range of what we describe from a human perspective as discrete moments occurring. So that would be, for example, like in a specific equation that you're trying to solve or balance, then each individual action, we would know that the first thing to do based upon the value we've placed on our previous information that we've grabbed is to subtract 5 from both sides so we can start isolating x. So this is the action that has taken place. This is what we've written on our piece of paper as a result of the value we placed on the information that we have. This might seem incredibly obvious, right? We're just stating basically the fundamentals of how we're making decisions, essentially, right? There's some information that we have, we place value on that information, and then based upon the value that we place on the information, we're gonna make some action in reality. There's gonna be some behavior that comes out of our human existence into reality, right? And this is all kind of from the perspective of the first person individual that your brain is generating inside your head. If we wanna start, say, improving the outcomes of this algebra test, right? So let's say instead of doing that, we did, say like y plus 5 equals 4x, right? And so in this case, what went wrong is many different things, right? So we can analyze this from the perspective of, let's say, honesty. What if in our brain, when we went to grab information, we grabbed information that said that we should add 5 to both sides in this case, instead of subtracting 5 from both sides? In that case, if we're valuing that information and then we make action upon the value that we place on the information, then we're going to get this action, right? But let's say we have 2 pieces of information, one that says we should do y plus 5 and one that says we should do y minus 5, right? And we get this information down into our value system. And let's just say that this is 1 and this is 2, right? And so we have to pick between 1 and 2 because we have both of these pieces of information and we're trying to figure out, which one should we pick? And it just so happens that we pick number 1. So as a result of that, we're going to make some action that then gives us this incorrect result. But what we could also say is that we only have y minus 5, okay? But what happens, right? So we pull y minus 5 from our brain, and then we pick y minus 5 as the value. So we value y minus 5 as a piece of information that is going to properly perform the algebra expression that we're trying to solve. But what happens in action is that for some reason, our hand writes y plus 5 instead of y minus 5, right? And so although we had the correct information and we valued it correctly in order to perform an action to do it, the action that actually was performed for whatever mechanical or psychological reason is actually the incorrect action that we had desired to create. There's an amount of each of these that we have in regards to any particular problem that we're trying to solve, right? So there's an amount of honesty or rationality that we have in our head about anything that we want to try to do, right? So if I want to learn how to ride a bike, but I don't have a lot of honesty or rationality about how to ride a bike, I don't have a lot of information about how to ride a bike, then regardless of how much value I can place on the most important aspects of riding a bike in order to ride the bike the best, it doesn't matter because I don't have the information about how to ride a bike in the proper way, so I can never value those different pieces of information in a way that's going to give me the best actions that will then allow me to ride the bike. But let's say, although we have a bunch of good information about how to ride a bike. Let's say we even have experience somehow in our head of how to ride a bike, like the hard raw data already written into like the physical structures of our brain that allows us to ride a bike properly. And we're valuing that information, meaning that we're going to be using it whenever we're trying to ride a bike, but you're just like a brain hooked up to a machine and you have eyeballs. That kind of human, you know, can't actually ride a bike in the same way that that honesty kind of represents the information that we have present. Strength represents the kind of physical restraints or constraints, or even the psychological constraints that we have in performing any kind of behavior, right? So it could be that, you know, that we have, like I said, all of the information to ride a bike. We have all of the value to select the correct information to ride the bike. But for some reason, there's some deep psychological, like, I don't want to say unconscious, but like essentially unconscious function arising in our brain that when we attempt to use the information that we've selected as valuable, the action or our strength in order to do that thing just isn't there. Let's say we want to cook pasta really well, right? We have some goal in mind. We want to cook pasta well enough to where the most like critical food critic in the world is going to enjoy our pasta, right? In order to do this, we are going to need the information about how to do this. We're going to need the sensibilities in the moment as moments are passing and we're making the pasta to be able to perform the correct actions at the right moments. And then we're also going to have to actually do it, right? We're going to have to actually make the pasta, or be capable of physically making the pasta, or be psychologically prepared enough to go under the, you know, the pressure of making pasta for a critic of this esteem, right? And so what we can say is that there's kind of this range of honesty that we have. The question is, how much information do I have about making pasta, right? And if the answer to this question is not a lot, then at this point, we know that when we go to create the action of making the pasta, we're not going to have the right information or enough of the right information to be able to do that properly. So if we start here, the first thing to probably do is to get more information. So in order to better the chances of our outcome, we're going to inspect the information that we have inside of ourselves, which maybe honesty makes a little more sense now, right? So we're going to be honest with ourselves about the information that we have in our head that we know about making pasta, right? And we're going to get some kind of diagnosis about the information that we have about making pasta. And then we need to probably do something. Well, we either do or we don't, right? So we either need more information or we do have enough information and we don't need to. But let's say that we do have a lot of information, right? Let's say we feel that we have enough information to make pasta really well. And I don't know if some people are seeing this, but what we're actually doing is we're kind of recursively calling the behavior structure that I'm describing here, right? So in order to know if we have enough information to make the pasta, we have to grab information about ourselves, make a value judgment on it, and then perform some action based upon that, right? Which is whether or not we get more information. What I'm saying essentially with the structure is that every kind of system at any level, any perspective is going to necessarily fall into the three descriptions that I've pointed out. But anyways, let's continue. So if we have a lot of information, then we can move on to value, right? We can move on to, okay, so what parts of the information are valuable? We're going to pick which parts of the information that we have we should be using in order to make the best pasta, right? So from the perspective of the entirety of starting and ending making the pasta, the value is essentially, do I have the set of information that gives me or this set of information that I have in my head is giving me the ability to perform all of those actions. But if we take a single moment in the process of making pasta, we can say in that single moment, which pieces of information in that set of information am I valuing or using at this current moment in order to make the pasta? There's a possibility that we aren't going to pick the best pieces of information that we have accessible in order to make the pasta well. If we have some information about how to pick the information well, which is again recursively kind of using this process in order to do so, we are going to then be able to make action. So in this case, in this case, we'll have to, in order to optimize the value, right, in this kind of outcome, we'll talk about the other outcome in a second, we need to get more information about our value. So in this case, we're going to be moving to action. If we branch off here and we don't have a lot of information, we can still go down the tree of value to action. It's just that the action that comes out of it probably isn't going to be very useful to the goal that we have in mind, right? Similarly, in the value, we can pick the wrong information. We can misuse the information and we'll still get to an action. But if we want to optimize, or if we want to better do this in the future, what we should do here at this point is we should get more info about how we should be selecting the information that we have, or in this case, we should just get more information in general about making pasta, right? If we want to have better outcomes in the future. Can we perform the set of actions required to do what we have chosen to do? So let's say we're on a deserted island and our goal was to make the best pasta in the world for the harshest critic. Can we do that? No, we can't. So the conditions, whether psychological, physical, or whatever, do not allow us to perform the action that we are desiring. And I think that there's a lot of usefulness to describing this aspect of how we operate as strength, because I think that a lot of what comes down to the very final moments of taking action is an internal strength that one requires in order to perform a lot of actions. So let's say if we're talking about something that's like really hard to do, there is a certain amount of strength, generally psychological, but also sometimes physical, that is required in order to perform certain actions. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to reflect here. Same with like honesty. So, I don't say honesty because, it's about like who has the most honesty. It's more so about like, in order to get the correct amount of information about something that we want to get done, we have to be honest with ourselves about the current information that we have. And it's a crucial part to having the amount of information we need in order to do something. Similarly, in order to have like the ability to properly pick the information that we have to have the right set of values that we have internally in order to pick the correct amount of information or kind of information that we need to use in order to perform whichever action we want to use. And so then, obviously we need to have some kind of strength in order to perform that action. But if we can't perform the action, then what we should probably do is make it so we can. But the alternative is that we can. And in this case, there's no optimization needed. We get the perfect pasta. Or at least we tried our best, right? So at this point, there is no guarantee. Oh God. Okay, we're just gonna ignore the spelling on guarantee. There's no guarantee of desired outcome. Although we aren't guaranteed, let's put a question mark here. Although we're not guaranteed to make the best pasta ever, assuming you have been as honest with yourself as is possible in the moment in time, and you have valued the things that you know in the best possible way that you could have, and you are performing the actions that you desire to perform based upon the honesty that you have in the best way that you can, this is by definition the best outcome you could have gotten from your perspective, right? So it could be that you actually got a worse outcome because you were trying to optimize all of these situations that I'm talking about here, right? That's totally possible. The outcome is never guaranteed in one particular way. And I'm just saying that in order to optimize from your perspective, the best chance of an outcome from your perspective is to follow this kind of optimization model, right? So to make sure that you have the most information about the goal that you're trying to achieve, that you know what is the important information that's relevant to that goal in order to achieve it, and that you have the capability and the strength that's required in order to achieve that goal. From all of that, there's kind of this, I don't know what to call it, but it's this quote that I came up with as I've been philosophizing throughout the years, and it's basically this. We all ought to be completely honest, but we all need kindness. And kindness in this description is actually value. So we all ought to be completely honest. That is to say that we all ought to strive to be as informed about the things that we care about as we possibly can be. If we desire to get the best outcomes out of life, right? We necessarily must have as much information about it as we can, because that gives us a higher chance of getting the things that we want. but we all need value, right? So a person who is entirely honest, who is incredibly rational, but has no sense of value for what's actually valuable, they're screwed, right? They're essentially a rock because they have all of the information they could ever need, but they don't have any value in regards to that information, right? They don't know what is like more valuable or less valuable. And that's what we're saying with kindness. So in this context, you can kind of think of it like socially, where it's like, I know everything about a social situation, but just because I know everything about it doesn't mean that it feels good, right? I still need like to know or to feel some kind of kindness from the people around me in order to feel a certain way that is maybe desirable. But that's a little too specific. This is more broad. Remember, kindness and value in this sense are talking about specifically function. So, it's a little more abstract than what this is kind of clearly saying. But again, the purpose of changing it from like function, value to kindness, or like from information to honesty/rationality is to make it a little easier for the layman to understand like the loaded morality that comes in with a lot of this analysis. So we all ought to be completely honest, but we all need kindness. We all ought to be completely kind, but dishonest kindness is not kind, and honest kindness requires strength. So we all ought to be completely able to, without doubt, value pieces of information in a way to get us the best outcomes. But we can't do so if we're not honest with ourselves, if we aren't constantly being critical about the information that we know, because in the way that we value things, we're actually using previous information and other information in order to value the value that we have, right? And so if we're not honest with ourselves about the value that we're placing on the information we have, then we're not actually going to get the value that we desire, right? But in order to be honest with ourselves and in order to value things properly, there's a certain amount of strength that is necessarily required, right? So if you are honest with yourself and you're valuing that honesty in a particular way that benefits you as best you know it, in order to do the things that you feel, by this definition, are principled by your honesty and value, it requires a certain amount of strength in order to actually do the things that you feel are correct and right and will get you the best outcomes you desire. Assuming we are brute forcing our way through life and we do everything that we desire and we want, it will only get us as far as we are honest with ourselves, as far as we are correctly valuing the things that actually matter to us, as far as we are kind of internally tearing apart what we know and ensuring and validating that it's actually accurate and expansive enough to get the things that we want out of life. Otherwise, we're going to be going around doing a whole bunch of action, doing a whole bunch of things, but the outcomes of that action is in general and most likely not going to line up with the value or our information about how reality works, right? Or what we could know about how information works. Anyone who doesn't have who doesn't care, who doesn't really need the super in-depth analysis of the systems and consciousness and how existence operates from, my perspective. I love this stuff, but I know that most people don't, right? And so this is kind of a very clear and easy way to create the kind of bedrock of my moral and principled understanding of reality, right? And so I just think it flows really nicely. It's kind of poetic. It's beautiful, but it's also very, very informative from the kind of analysis that we've just gone through. But yeah, that's kind of I guess I would say the beginning of my moral framework. There's a lot more to digest here and there's a lot more to go into, but this is kind of the founding principle and how I get to the actual morality and the structure of what I believe is meaningful, valuable, and what we should be doing.